Magandang gabi at magandang umaga po sa ating lahat and welcome to day 17 of our Soulergy. So kahapon, Pastor Dave started our study po on the prayers of Paul at ipagpapatuloy po yun natin ngayon, this time po in his letter to the church in Corinth. So let us read po 2 Corinthians chapter 1 verses 3 to 4. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. So this opening statement po of Paul is actually a deviation to his usual way of beginning his letters. Because usually po, he begins po his letters by thanking God for the situation po of the church, for their faithfulness in the gospel. But in this letter po, he begins by offering a praise po to God for what he has done for him and through him. So what can we learn po from Paul's prayer of praise? First po is that there is a God who comforts us in all our troubles. So we know this po, we often hear this, but what does it really mean po when we talk about the comfort that comes from God? In the Old Testament po, the word comfort refers to God's decisive intervention to rescue and relieve His people in times of distress and affliction. That's from Hopheus po, isa po siyang theologian. For example, in Isaiah 40 verse 1, we hear God declaring His comfort for Israel. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. According po to David Garland, the divine commission that the prophet Isaiah overhears, comfort my people, does not have as its end simply consoling the people in their affliction. God intends to intervene and deliver them out of their affliction. That's why po in Isaiah 40 verse 3, it says po, a voice of one calling, in the wilderness prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. So in this verse po, we hear po yung prophecy about John the Baptist. And we know po that the ministry of John the Baptist is to prepare po the people for the coming of the Messiah. So if we can see po, God's declaration of comfort po in verse 1 was followed po by His declaration po of deliverance in verse 3. And this deliverance po is not just for Israel, but actually po for mankind. So we see that the word comfort po does not just refer to God consoling His people, but actually it refers to God being actively involved po in providing deliverance for His people. So tignan naman po natin ang usage po ng word na comfort in this particular text po that we are studying po sa Corinthians. According po ulit kay David Garland, the comfort that Paul has in mind has nothing to do with a languorous feeling of contentment. It is not some tranquilizing dose of grace that only dulls pain, but a stiffening agent that fortifies one in heart, mind, and soul. So kanina po, we talk about God's comfort po in terms of His intervention po in the circumstances po of His people. Dito naman po makikita natin how God moves po, not just in our circumstances, but also in our hearts po. He changes us from within, fortifying our hearts, our minds, and our soul. Continuing po, comfort relates to encouragement, help, and exhortation. God's comfort strengthens weak knees and sustains sagging spirits so that one faces the troubles of life with unbending resolve and unending assurance. So ibig sabihin po, God sees our sufferings po and hears our cries and reaches out His hand po to comfort us. That is po, He moves by delivering us po out of our afflictions or by giving us po the strength po, the strengthening grace and the encouragement po that we need as we go through our afflictions po. So ito po mga ito, para saan po ito? Hindi lang po ito for our own strengthening in the faith, for our own growth po in our walk with God, but also po for others. So let us continue verse 4 po of 2 Corinthians chapter 1. Sabi po, God comforts us so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. Sabi po mali ni David Garland, Paul's experience has taught him that God comforts him so that he can be a comfort to others. God's comfort is not intended to stop with us. God always gives a surplus and intends it to overflow to others. It is not given not just to make us feel better, but to bolster us for the task of fortifying others to face suffering. Sabi po, God does not comfort us to make us comfortable, but to make us comforters. In other words po, our lives are part of a bigger whole po. Our suffering and our comfort po are not for ourselves alone. God has a bigger purpose po for allowing us to go through pain, suffering, afflictions po, and likewise, He has a bigger purpose po for allowing us to experience His comfort. Sabi nga po ni Paul sa verse 6 po ng 2 Corinthians, if we are distressed, it is for your comfort and salvation. If we are comforted, it is for your comfort, which produces in you patient endurance of the same sufferings we suffer. Kasi po, we will never know po who will need the encouragement, the strength, the healing po that we receive from God. But surely po, someone will. Because our lives are intertwined, what happens to us affects others, and also po, how we respond to what happens to us affects others as well. So having known these things po, how should this affect po our prayer lives? First po, may this give us the confidence and the assurance po as we come to God in prayer that He is the God po who sees not just our suffering po, but the suffering po of the people around us. We have been praying po for Ukraine and Russia, and also have been praying po for the Philippines and other countries. Let us remember po that we are coming to the God of all comfort. The God whose comfort is way more than po a consoling feeling, but an active force po that can change po our circumstances, that can change the hearts of people. And second po, sa ating mga sariling pinagdadaanan, sa panahon po ng ating pong pagsubok at challenges, let's continue to come to God po and ask for His help, ask for strength, ask for healing po, ask for His intervention. Because He is the God who comforts us, who sees our pain po, who hears our cries of desperation, our laments po. At minsan mahirap po yung makita yung malaking larawan po ng Diyos, especially po if we are in the middle po of our pain. But kagaya nga po ng nasabi po ni Pastor Derek po sa kanyang teaching, prayer aligns us with the purposes of God. And those purposes po are not just for us, but also for His kingdom. Na sana po alalahanin po natin as we persevere po and as we prevail in prayer, we are actually aligning ourselves po with God's purposes. We are allowing Him to move po in our circumstances. And we are allowing Him po to change us from within. And as we do that po, we are allowing God po to prepare and to use us po for a world who is very much in need of His comfort po. The comfort po that we receive from Him, we have been receiving time and time again po, and we will continue po to receive as we come to Him, as we prevail po in prayer.